Okay, breaks over, and we are back at our next session called Increasing Student Pathways Through Micro-Credentials and BCCAT's TCS. This presentation is going to discuss how BCCAT and TRU have been working together to develop a common micro-credential assessment practice as well as a provincial digital repository. TRU has expertise in prior learning assessment, and that's been used to develop a consistent and rigorous assessment process for non-credited micro-credentials developed by post-secondary in BC. This presentation is going to give you an overview of the project to date, including some of the reasons we're doing this work, who's funding it, and the steps we have taken to build the repository. So on this session, it's my pleasure now to introduce Chad Doerksen, who is the Director of Post-Secondary Policy at the Ministry of Post-Secondary and Future Skills, as well as Susan Forseille, who is the Director of PLAR and Strategic Partnerships at TRU. And I'm also going to play a bit of a cameo role in this presentation as well. And as a reminder, we're all standing by to answer your questions at the end of this session. Enjoy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this session titled Increasing Student Pathways Through Micro-Credentials and BCCAT's TCS. The TCS has been used as a platform for articulating courses, predominantly on a course-by-course level within British Columbia. However, as we all know, there are many different ways that you can achieve transfer credit in British Columbia. And one of the areas that has seen considerable growth over the past few years has been the development of micro-credentials, which offer both short and medium-term programming at both degree granting post-secondary institutions as well as non-degree granting post-secondary institutions. For the past year, BCCAT has been collaborating with the BC Credit Bank, which is not to be confused with a financial bank. It's an actual organization within Thompson Rivers University, to develop a micro-credential assessment practice as well as a provincial digital repository for micro-credentials. TRU's expertise in prior learning assessment has been utilized to develop a consistent and rigorous assessment process of non-credited micro-credentials developed by post-secondaries in British Columbia. So as part of this presentation, to tell you a little bit more about micro-credentials and the work being done by the BC Credit Bank, it's my pleasure now to introduce Chad Doerksen, who is the Director of Post-Secondary Policy with the Ministry of Post-Secondary Education and Future Skills, as well as Susan Forseille, who is the Director for Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition and Strategic Partnerships at TRU. And of course, I'm Mike Winsemann, Director of Transfer and Technology at BCCAT. So for today's agenda, we are going to talk about the provincial strategy for investing in micro-credentials. We're going to talk about TRU and the BC Credit Bank and the work that's been done so far. We'll talk about how BCCAT technologies are now available to support micro-credential assessments, and we'll talk about rollout and next steps. And just as a reminder, we are all standing live and available to answer questions. So if you have questions, please put them into the chat or the question and answer, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. So now, just to set a little bit more context for the session, I'm going to pass the virtual baton over to Chad Doerksen, who's going to speak on behalf of the ministry. Over to you, Chad.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I'm happy to speak to some of the investment that the province has made in micro-credential initiatives over the past several years. Micro-credentials have really become a vital part of BC's strategy for developing a future-ready workforce, enabling individuals to quickly obtain the skills that they need to thrive in a rapidly changing economy. Since 2020, the province has invested over 22 million in micro-credential initiatives, supporting the development of over 210 programs in high-demand sectors such as healthcare, technology, clean energy, and construction. Funding has also supported system coordination and innovation, including through initiatives such as this micro-credentials credit pathways project. And while all micro-credentials should have standalone value, wherever possible, they should also support additional learning pathways through stacking, laddering, or transfer to further learning. This initiative set out to establish a repeatable and trusted process for assessing non-credit micro-credentials for credit, enabling institutions across BC to identify potential credit pathways within their own institutions. The motivation behind this work is simple. If we increase learner pathways by recognizing the competencies that individuals have already demonstrated, we will enable learners to reach their educational and career goals faster, and in turn support our province's economic resilience. Thompson Rivers University and BCCAT became obvious partners in this work, leveraging TRU's strengths in prior learning assessment and recognition, and housing the BC Credit Bank and BCCAT's robust transfer credit system for the benefit of the BC public post-secondary system and the learners that we all serve. I'll pass it over to Susan to go over some of the details of this initiative.
Thank you, Chad. So I'm going to talk a little bit about TRU and the BC Credit Bank and what our role is in this initiative. So TRU was asked to be a partner in January of 2023, and we were tasked to find a way to assess micro-credentials for possible transfer credit. Part of this is that many of the micro-credentials that were being developed hadn't gone through a governance process in the institutions where they were being developed. And we wanted to make sure that we found a really rigorous way to assess these micro-credentials for the volume of learning and for possible credit. TRU, part of the reason we were invited into this was because of the TRU Act in 2005. And if you look at the legislation, 3.1.c of the TRU Act states that TRU will provide an open learning educational credit bank for students. And in addition, our expertise in prior learning assessment was a really good fit for this initiative. We do a lot of prior learning assessment at TRU, approximately 70 to 80% of the PLAR, as we call it, in the province, and are one of the leaders in Canada for both the volume and the quality of what we do. The first steps that we did in this project was we wanted to develop a tool or a resource to assess micro-credentials. And to do this, we wanted expertise from other institutions around the province. And we also wanted to see what other people around North America, Australia, New Zealand, the European Union, what were they doing with micro-credentials in terms of assessing them and possibly giving them post-secondary credit. So we did some research on what other institutions or organizations were doing with micro-credentials. We pulled together a provincial committee of assessors to look at that research, and then we developed what we call a critical information summary. And that's a tool that we've been using to assess the micro-credentials, looking at really important considerations in regard to what is being taught, how is it being taught, and what is being assessed. So the critical information summary right now has about 24 fields, and I say about because we're still refining that tool. So some of the fields that we have in that is what is the course learning objectives? Who is the audience for the micro-credentials? What are the learners? What programs are they coming from? What experience do they have? What is in the course syllabus under the lesson plan? We pay a lot of attention to how are they assessing the learning, both the volume of the learning and the quality of the learning. We're also in the critical information summary asking questions about who's teaching these micro-credentials, what are their qualifications, or what are the organization's policies for the hiring of instructors. We're also asking about how they're getting feedback on both the instructor and the course or the micro-credential that they have developed. And then a series of other questions. And all of the information in the critical information summary has been designed to give us confidence, to provide rigor, quality assurance, and also a consistent way to assess these micro-credentials the same. And so that when we assess these micro-credentials, other institutions that are looking at what was assessed, the information that was being used to determine if there could possibly be credits for these micro-credentials. And an important note before we go to the next slide, most of the micro-credentials that we've been assessing haven't gone through formal governance approval at the post-secondary institutions. So we needed to add levels of thoroughness to make sure that there was high confidence in this tool. So now that we have used this tool, we had two projects where the first project we assessed 10 micro-credentials. We refined the tool based on feedback from our committee, our provincial assessor committee, and the various people that used the tool, including the assessors and the institutions that developed the micro-credentials. And then the second round, we're just finishing up assessing 50 micro-credentials. And then the question was asked, we have this excellent information. We'll have 60 micro-credentials assessed. What do we do with this information so that other institutions can see what was assessed, how was it assessed, what are the recommended credits to award, and possible pathways into other institutions? So with that question on where to assess, there really was only one place to look, and that was BCCAT. Their expertise in technology, the trust that others have in the province, is being leveraged to create a platform to store and manage the micro-credentials that is visible to other post-secondary institutions so they can see what information was collected in the critical information summary and make decisions on which micro-credentials they want to walk into their programs and how. So this combination of expertise by TRU and BCCAT is really going to impact how skills and competencies are recognized, validated, displayed, and assessed in our post-secondary education system here in BC.
Okay, and so I will take the virtual baton from here to talk a little bit more about BCCAT's role. And you'll notice that we have been using a fair bit of airplane terminal or imagery throughout this presentation. Susan and I have given presentations on this in the past, and we've often described the work with micro-credentials as building the plane while it's in the air. So if you're wondering where those themes came from for the graphics, that's what we are drawing upon. So with regards to BCCAT, obviously with the transfer credit system, it seemed like an obvious place where micro-credentials could be housed as a repository and that the TCS could eventually be adapted as a workflow. As you all know, we already have an established workflow that enables institutions to send out requests for articulation on a course-by-course basis. It enables subject matter experts to enter their evaluations into the system, and then the ending results are then published in the BC Transfer Guide as course-to-course articulations. So we thought, well, what if the TCS were to do the same thing, but to also be a place where micro-credentials could be housed as well as managed and eventually be adapted as a workflow. Now, we've mentioned on a couple of the sessions already that we did a TCS deployment in October, and one of the things that we have secretly deployed that we did not tell everyone about is that we have actually released the micro-credential functionality that has been built within the TCS. So it's not been turned on for everyone. So if you go into the TCS, you will not necessarily see the micro-credentials menu as of yet, but it will be there eventually. And the purpose of the TCS right now is that it will act as a repository for previously established micro-credentials pathways that have been reviewed by the BC Credit Bank at TRU. Right now, the first phase of this project involves using the TCS as a repository. So it's not a workflow as of yet, but it will be a place right now for managing existing assessments. Those pathways, those micro-credential pathways, will then be published both on the BC Transfer Guide and available via API, meaning it can be published on additional websites such as the TRU BC Credit Bank website as well. As part of a secondary phase of this project, we are now looking at turning the TCS into a workflow to enable institutions to propose micro-credential pathways to other institutions, and other institutions will be able to respond to those micro-credential pathway requests. This will also provide greater access to institutions to documentation related to the micro-credential programs. You'll be able to see the results, how other institutions have assessed the micro-credentials, and we'll be able to take advantage of some of the infrastructure that's already in place within the TCS to support this workflow. We are currently working out screenshots and development designs for this phase of the work. So it's not imminent right now, but we are going to be working on it as throughout the course of this fiscal year, as well as into the next fiscal year. So I'm going to pass it back to Susan, who's going to talk a little bit about where we're at in terms of testing, and then we will turn to the audience for questions and comment. Over to you, Susan.
Thank you. So we have 3 slides coming up on our next steps. And the first one is we have partnered with 3 post-secondary institutions in the province to test the repository to determine what's working with the tool that's been developed, what's working with the critical information summary as well. What can they walk into their programs? Where do they need more information? What is the level of trust in the assessments? So essentially, we're working with those 3 schools for them to access that repository, to share with us what strengths and challenges they found, and then we'll make the necessary adjustments before a wider rollout. So next we want to talk about what does that wider rollout or that public rollout look like for the public post-secondary institutions in BC. So with the feedback that we're going to get from the pilot institutions and the adjustment that we're going to do, we'll implement the changes in the repository. And then what we hope to have happened is that we will open up that repository with the 60 micro-credentials that have been assessed and a handful of other ones, so that every post-secondary institution in the province can see what was assessed, how was it assessed, who assessed it, what are the recommended credit awards and pathways. They'll have the final decision what they walk into their programs, what they stack and ladder and how, but the bulk of the information to make those decisions should be in that repository. So we'll roll this out with aims to standardize it. And then the last step we want to talk about is to expand that repository. So we're starting with micro-credentials because that's been such an important focus. And we hope that this repository of micro-credentials will grow into something bigger, into that provincial credit bank, where we will include non-formal learning credentials for greater validation options. And what we mean by that is looking at other types of learning that aren't always formal and look at opportunities to give learners credit for that. So that might be private training they took in an organization. Maybe they work at a bank or with the RCMP or the Canadian Armed Forces, or they went to a private school and there's no pathways into other schools right now. So the next steps is to expand what we're doing with micro-credentials and to build it into a bigger bank of learning that's been pre-assessed, and institutions can decide which ones they're going to accept into their program. The team that we put together is very dedicated to this, and we're available around the clock to provide immediate assistance and support, answer questions. And back to that airplane metaphor, you can see the airplane here flying. We have been building this as we go, and it has been a lot of learning as we go. So your feedback as you watch this presentation and as we open it up for questions is really valuable, because we can make those changes as we go. And the more people that give us feedback on the repository and what they need to see in it to build trust, I think the stronger this will be, and we'll be able to work together to build something really amazing for the people of BC. So off to the next slide. I just wanted to say thank you so much for attending. As I mentioned, we've been monitoring the chat as you've been watching this, and we're ready to go to your questions now. So thank you so much, Chad. Thank you, Mike. Let's see what questions we have from the audience.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for listening to our session. And it is now my pleasure at this time to welcome Chad Doerksen from the Ministry of Post-Secondary and Future Skills and Susan Forseille from Thompson Rivers University. Welcome, both of you. All right, just as a reminder, please put your questions and comments into the chat as we are standing by. So we have a first question here from Carrie, who is a question about the critical information summary. She's asking, is the process to generate the CIS a manual process, or is an AI application being used to help develop that the CIS?
Do you want me to start with that and you can finish the answer?
Sure, yeah.
So right now it is manual. We have a form that can be populated, a digital form, and that's works so far, but over to you, Mike. Yeah.
We are actually looking at AI to populate the CIS. It's one of those use cases that I think makes a lot of sense because a lot of the information can be found and it can be processed through AI and then it can be placed into CIS. If you've used AI, you know that it's quite good at putting things into tables and categorizations. So that's definitely something that we are looking at. But as Susan mentioned, it is a manual process as of right now, but we hope to find greater efficiencies in the future. We do have another question here. What can post-secondary institutions do to ensure that their micro-credentials are included in the BC Credit Bank? I'll pass that to you, Susan, and then I have a second question for you, Chad.
Yeah. That's a really good question. And right now, the micro-credentials that we've been assessing have predominantly been funded through the ministry. And so of the 60 that we've assessed, I think 53 of them have been funded through the provincial or been funded through the province. So we worked with Chad in the committee to look at the labor market needs and determine which ones that we were going to assess. And moving forward, if you want yours included, you just have to reach out to us at TRU and we'll absolutely put it through the process.
And I have a question more about the marketing efforts of micro-credentials. And I guess a question for you, Chad, is are there any ongoing efforts or plans to start marketing the micro-credentials that are part of the BC Credit Bank that are going to be held by post-secondary institutions?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Well, our colleagues at the Education Planner BC have micro-credential listings as a part of their catalog of programs available to learners in the province, and we're actively working with our partners there to update that repository so that the information included is the most up-to-date and comprehensive picture of micro-credential offerings in the system. So that's the first step. Yeah, beyond that, I think many of the institutions are making their own efforts to market these to their communities and to reach the audiences that would find them of use. So.
Right. Thank you, Chad. And then there's a question here about, this is probably, I think, directed towards you, Susan. Have you had any interest in rolling out the process of micro-credentials and credential reviews at other provinces? Have you had any discussions with other provinces with regards to this?
I guess it would depend on there's been a lot of interest in it. I think it's pretty safe to say that from different provinces and actually internationally, but nothing concrete. We want to focus on what we're doing now, make sure we're doing it exceptionally well, build that foundation so it's really strong, so that we continue to have confidence that the stacking and laddering of these micro-credentials works for the people of BC.
There's a question here from Sarah from Columbia College who's asking, what resources would you recommend for developing new micro-credentials? And also as a follow-up, can private nonprofit institutions develop micro-credentials or is the micro-credential development funding only limited to public institutions? So we'll start with you, Susan, on the question about what resources you would recommend for developing new micro-credentials.
Yeah, I'm going to go pretty big with this one, very holistic. Two really important considerations. What do the students want and need, and what do the employers want and need? And I would start with that. And the more you can work with the labor market in terms of building the content and the assessment of the content, the better it'll be for the students and, of course, for the employers. So that would be my first one. Online, there's some really good tools. BC Campus published a document on how to do micro-credentials. The province has a really good handbook on micro-credentials. BC Campus, I think, is the best place to go right now for some other additional resources.
All right, and with regards to the funding for development of new micro-credentials, can private institutions apply for funding to develop micro-credentials, or is the funding limited to just public post-secondary institutions? Could I ask Chad if you want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, happy to. And I'll just first echo what Susan was saying. The micro-credentials we've found the most success with are the ones that have partnered with employment and labor market partners and community partners to identify the needs that the competencies are meant to address. And micro-credentials really come down to recognition. So the right organizations, the right employers being able to verify that competencies coming out of those credentials are recognized leads to success in the labor market and further educational pathways. So I just wanted to echo that and to say that we have a framework available on our website that provides a broad picture of what micro-credentials are from the provincial perspective, and that the toolkit that Susan referenced at BC Campus is also a great resource. In terms of funding, to date, our provincial funding has focused on supporting public post-secondary institutions. If that changes in the future, we'll have information available on our website. You can keep an eye on the micro-credential webpage on our provincial webpage for funding opportunities if they come available.
All right. Thank you very much for that. And thank you, Tracy Roberts from BC Campus. She's just very helpfully put the link to the resource that you just mentioned into the chat. So appreciate that. So that's there for everybody who wants to take a look at it. You can find it on the chat tab of our event. We are at time, and so I'm going to hold us to that. I really appreciate you both taking the time both to give the presentation and also to be on hand to answer questions. And if there are any follow-up questions, we'll be sure to relay them to both you, Susan, and Chad. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a 1-minute pause and get set up for the next session, and then we're going to welcome Dr. Rob Fleming, who is going to give us a BC Transfer System and Council update. We'll see you in 1 minute.